This guy wants to cut taxes, and he's telling people, well, the tariffs will pay for it. He's got Bissett saying it. He's got Bissett saying it. That's his Treasury Secretary designate. That's absolute nonsense. A 60% tariff on China will generate about $90 billion a year. His tax cuts are going to cost about $300 or $400 billion a year. I mean,
Right.
they do math like Abbott and Costello in that routine, where they multiply and divide. My feeling is that Bissett is detached from reality.
I mean, there is that American cliche of the economy stupid, but Trump has said to the American people, you can trust me with the economy. Whatever you were told about GDP and macroeconomics, we all know that you didn't feel richer, which is why you didn't vote for Biden. How hard a promise is it to keep that he will make the economy work for ordinary Americans?
Quite hard. The economy is growing well these days, and real wages are rising again. And we've made up more or less the lost ground, from COVID, and the prospects are good. But the things that most disturb Americans are cultural in nature. The Biden prosperity was built on immigrants. I mean, we are adding a record number of jobs, but more than half of those jobs are going to people who have jumped the border simply because there's not enough Americans to do many of these jobs. And now he wants to shut that down. People have a cultural reaction to these people, but they don't recognize how vital they are to their lifestyles, circumstances, and prosperity. Even if you don't have a housekeeper, the fact that there is somebody available to work at McDonald's or at Starbucks and so forth does change the quality of your life. But there's a disconnect between how the economy really works and the kinds of rhetoric both men threw around. For example, Joe Biden has got everybody convinced he's going to get them into a factory job in a union. Well, if he's going to do that, then I'll be playing striker for one of your Manchester United, okay? And it's 78, 60, 76. I don't think that's a good prospect.
Yeah, and it's interesting point, 'cause we have the same debate in this country, of course, about immigrants, and the argument that's often levelled is that immigration might increase GDP, but it doesn't increase GDP per head. So it grows the overall pot, but it weakens the economy because people are getting paid less, they're spending less, and therefore it's not as good as it seems. How does that argument stack up in America?
It strikes well, and again, there's a certain fallacy in it. Uh, One of the great challenges we have here with our social safety net, you have the health insurance, you have the health service problem, is that the Social Security fund's running out of money. These people come here and they work in very large numbers. They're not adults; they really work, and they're not drones. Excuse me, they really work, and so that they pay Social Security taxes and all the rest of that stuff. And if we take them out of the system, the Social Security fund is going to run out sooner rather than later. They're really increasing the social capacity of the United States more than anything else. And I would say to you also, the reaction they're receiving is not much different. I'm an Italian American. My family came in the 1890s and 1900s, and they're getting the same reaction my grandparents got. My older brother, who's 80, and I reflect on it. And we say, who we see? We see our grandparents in these people. And by the
Really?
way, on other issues, John and I are pretty darn conservative.
Yeah. But what happens if the tap gets switched off? I mean, can Donald Trump stop immigration, mass immigration in the way that he promises? But if he does, what's the economic reality in 2 years' time? Because he has 2 years till the midterms. He'll want to reshape, if he's going to reshape American economics in those 2 years. What happens if he does turn off the immigration tap?
I think that he's going to focus on the big cities where there are too many people around. There are a lot of homeless people in New York City. There are a lot of homeless people in Chicago. They do create social problems in that regard. I mean, it's not fun having lots of people on the street because the price of housing is so high. I don't know that subtracting them in those places is going to make that much difference. What really matters is the following. About half or so of all the agricultural workers in the United States are illegal immigrants. They're not going to go out to the cabbage patches and the lettuce patches and pick, haul away pickers. They're going to go into the city of Chicago and pick a fight with the mayor there, who is very, very liberal and very progressive and very, very critical of Donald Trump. I don't know that we're going to feel it as much as we're going to be appalled by it. Because when you get down to what it means to deport people, you're talking about, okay, you arrest the criminals. That nobody's going to have a problem with that. But are you really going to go into people's workplaces and grab them by their collar, or
Mm.
just pick them up off the street and leave behind children that may have been born here? It's an interesting concept. These are interesting questions. That's going to bother people. Uh, in the abstract, it's kind of like remember Star Trek, Beam Me Up, Scotty? These folks think that Donald Trump's going to beam these people up. I don't think they realize,
Yeah.
as the British people didn't before Sunak got started, just what it means to deport people.
Yeah.
By the way,
It's,
the majority of Americans want the border sealed, but they
yeah.
don't want these people sent home. They're upset about it, but they just want no more of it.
Yeah.
There's a big difference. Donald Trump is greatly overreading his mandate. This happens over and over again. Bill Clinton overread his mandate with regard to health care, and Joe Biden did it with regard to woke policies. It seems as though there's something intoxicating about becoming president of the United States, which causes these men to lose the connection that they had to the polity, and then overdo it.
Yeah.
Like, we're going
It's
to have a great
interesting.
cultural reset here. All of a sudden, we're going to go back to the 50s. Good luck
Yeah.
on that, too.
Yeah. What about inflation? 'Cause that's the other big issue, economically speaking, and it's connected, and it may be connected to tariffs. So Trump says he's going to do tariffs. People in this country don't want to believe he will. But if you increase the price of goods, some people believe you of imported goods. Some people believe you fuel inflation. Inflation is a big problem for economies. Now, I know Trumpian economists don't believe that, but do you think inflation could be a problem? Do you think he'll go ahead with the tariff proposals he's making?
Oh, there's going to have to be some tariffs, because that's something he can do with stroking a pen, given the laws that Congress has made, and he has to deliver on his promises. And so there's going to be some tariffs. If he puts tariffs on China, I don't think there's going to be as much of an effect on inflation as people think, simply because the Chinese will subsidize even more. They have the capacity to do that. They'll let their currency run down and so forth. Now, if he starts putting a tax on French wine, the Americans are going to see that. That's one thing. The other is that we're going to get more inflation because of the way Biden has set this up. I mean, Biden in his last month or so has broken his neck to create a situation that puts Donald Trump in a bind. I mean, talk about big city Chicago style politics. This country boy from Delaware might as well be the great grandson of Boss Tweed. Let me give you a really good example. Joe Biden has been suppressing the price of oil by going easy on the Russians with regard to the oil sanctions. And he even sold oil out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to try to get, to keep prices down for the election and so forth. Once it became apparent that Donald Trump would be president in November, well, that went away. And now he's really tightened the sanctions on Russia. And the price of gasoline right down the street from me is up 20 cents a gallon. And it's going to go up further from that.
Really?
That will filter into the inflation numbers reported in February. Already, the Wall Street Journal, which is very conservative on its editorial page and woke as all hell on its news pages, is saying economists are already factoring in the impact of Donald Trump. They've raised their expectations for inflation for this year. Well, how? Gee whiz. That's not Trump's inflation. That's Biden's inflation. You watch. Donald Trump is going to get blamed for some of Joe Biden's sins. And then when he says, oh, but Joe Biden did that, the Democrat says, oh, poo-poo. Didn't you say that about us blaming, you and Barack Obama blaming, which is, a great deal under a sport here. No one is father to failure.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's just true of politics the world over, I suspect. So just to finish the thinking on this, Peter, 4 years of Trump, we had 4 years of him. The story around the campfire seems very much to be, he knows what he wants this time. He's going to have people he can trust this time. He knows how the White House works this time. So we can put aside 2016 because that was the first dip at it, and he's come back a much more experienced operator. How would you predict?
That's really quite true. No one was more surprised the Wednesday after the election when he woke up and read the newspapers and had his scrambled eggs than Donald Trump in 2016. I mean, I can remember being in 1789, which is this fairly upscale restaurant in Washington, where people like me go. People who write for the papers here and so forth. And I can remember saying to a friend of mine, "Well, let's face it, he wasn't the best messenger, you know, and he's not going to win this election." And by the way, someone came over to our table and berated me and told me my mere presence was offensive. It gives you an idea what the culture's like. I write for the Washington Times, which is a conservative newspaper here in town. In any case, uh, he wakes up the next morning. He's got a form of government, and all he's got is a string of hotels. It
Yeah.
took him about a year to get organized. It took him some time to get the kind of people he wanted, but he was successful. He was successful. His tax cuts created more investment. The growth rate since 2016 under these two presidents has been better than 2.5% a year.
Yeah.
Through the Obama and Bush years, both had identical records, 1.9%.
Yeah.
Trump and Biden, identical records, about 2.5%. Even after COVID, you take that out and you
Yeah.
just smooth out the line. They both were successful doing the same thing, spending a lot of money. One through tax cuts and the other through industrial policies and social programs. The country's gotten this huge Keynesian boost. And now we have the kind of fiscal problems that France has. We have a deficit that's 6.5%, 7% of GDP. What's different this time, okay, he's very well organized. He's got his operatives in place. You watch Wednesday morning, there are going to be all kinds, well, Tuesday morning, going to be all kinds of executive orders signed. Bill Clinton was that way. Bill Clinton was ready to run.
Yeah.
And we'll see how that works out. But on the other hand, this guy wants to cut taxes, and he's telling people, well, the tariffs will pay for it. And he's got Bissett saying it. That's his Treasury Secretary designate. That's absolute nonsense. A 60% tariff on China will generate about $90 billion a year. His tax cuts are going to cost about $300 or $400 billion a year. I mean, they do math like Abbott and Costello in that routine, where they multiply and divide. My feeling is that Bissett is detached from reality, not because he doesn't know better, but because it's necessary for him to have the job he wants.
Yeah.
He said that tariffs, ready for this? Tariffs won't raise prices because if you raise the price of one item and don't give people more money, they will not spend money on other things. The implication being, if you tax salt, the price of pepper will go down. When was the last time you heard a Republican, a conservative, or an economist that isn't steeped in progressive ideology tell you that raising taxes doesn't have a consequence for prices? I mean, that is as surely as dropping an apple from, Newton's tower. I mean, it's going to hit the ground and make applesauce. So when the applesauce arrives, Mr. Bissett is going to have about as much credibility, as Donald Duck talking about economics. Really, it's absurd, the things they're saying.
So what happens
and again,
then?
I'm a conservative. I'd like less taxes too,
Yeah. So what happens then? So when reality bites, what happens?
Well, it depends on how extreme they go and what they do. There's a right way to deal with China and a wrong way.
Yeah.
We know by now, and I think you folks are learning on your side of the pond, that negotiating with China is a fool's journey.
Yeah.
They basically run out your mandate. You go in and negotiate with them. They bicycle. And by the time you reach an agreement, domestic problems have caused the leader, whether it's your prime minister or my president or the president of premier of France, to lose their credibility.
Yeah.
Then they sign an agreement, and when they lose the election, they don't keep it. You absolutely cannot trust the Chinese government to keep its word on trade. They break one agreement after another and just ignore them. So the way to deal with China is on the first day to impose a 20% tariff, not 60-20. Tell all the people that come in looking for exceptions and exclusions, you can manage 20% because they're going to let their exchange rate go down. And after a time goes by, another 20%. And you keep raising it until the supply chain shifts around. The stuff isn't necessarily going to come here to be made. Most of it can't be made here anymore, given the wages we have. But, as one friend of mine put it, The Mexicans buy Chevys. If they get the exports, they'll buy stuff from us. If
Yeah.
the Indonesians get the exports, they'll buy stuff from us. If the Chinese get the exports, they'll build a bigger navy and cause us to have to go out and build a bigger navy. It's that kind of thing. Also, a lot of that money will end up in the Treasury, and let's face it, Donald Trump's going to cut some taxes. So we might as well find some money to cover it, but we're not going to find enough.
No, it's. I tell you what, Peter. I'd like to speak to you in 6 months' time when we see precisely what started and what's
Be
manageable.
happy to.
Yeah, let's do
Be
that.
happy to.
It's going to be a fascinating.
But don't say 2 years. He's got until like November. Once we get past November, December, January, all of Congress gets focused on the next election. And by that time, he'll have stepped on his tongue enough times, committed enough errors, that the Democrats have lots of stuff to work on. Also, he only can afford to lose if he gets all of his people in one vote in the House of Representatives. One. Because some of his cabinet members are leaving the House, so they're going to be special elections. This guy could wake up with a Democratic House anytime. Anytime. And it isn't going to take much for that to happen. Yeah. So they better move fast, and they will, and they'll break things, and they will, and then we'll see how it all sorts out. But I figure by summer, this is going to be a very interesting place to watch.
Peter, I'm sure you're right. And listen, what a great pleasure speaking to you. It's a fascinating time to be talking American politics. Great, man. Good to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.